Living in the shadow of the Port of Oakland, there's no buffer area that separates the business of the port from the residential quality of life needs. There's no real buffer area as like in Europe. There's 5-mile open space, 10-mile open space from where people live at and where the port does its business.
When we look at the data in Alameda County, and we have very good data. We have data on deaths, we have data on hospitalizations, we have data on emergency room use, and we have data on asthma in schools. And when we look at this data comprehensively, we can actually calculate life expectancy in Alameda County. And what we have seen through looking at hundreds of thousands of death certificates is that a child born in West Oakland, an African-American child, will live on average 15 years less long, will die 15 years before a child born in the Oakland Hills. And we think that that's not right, and that the strategies that we have to adopt to change that are not just pills and stethoscopes and health education. It's also about changing the way institutions behave, changing the way that structures in our society fundamentally distribute resources. And when we say distribute resources, we're talking about distributing health beneficial resources, but also health injurious resources like pollution. And disproportionately, pollution is distributed in communities that have little power. And we think that the difference between West Oakland and the Oakland Hills is that the people of West Oakland are assumed to not be as valuable as the people in the hills of Oakland. So we need to change that assumption. And our best way of doing that is to organize people to demand more equity in the way that institutional decisions are being made.
We're doing some great things, but more specifically, a couple years ago we moved forward along with the Port of Los Angeles with the Clean Air Action Plan. And that's a monumental cutting-edge plan which essentially the ports have said, look, we need to clean up the air pollution, both with regard to vessels, but more specifically with regard to the trucking industry. And I think that's where you've seen a tremendous change. It's been challenging, but I think by all accounts, it's been very successful.
Doug Bloch. I'm the Port of Oakland Campaign Director for Change to Win and the Director of the Coalition for Clean and Safe Ports. The Southern California ports, when they started out their environmental initiatives, they stood up in a public meeting and said, hey, guess what, industry? You're going to have to start to pay the costs of moving goods through our communities, including the costs of polluting. We haven't seen that level of leadership from the Port of Oakland.
So what precisely is being done in Long Beach and Los Angeles that isn't actually happening in Oakland yet?
Well, I would point out to the Port of Los Angeles specifically on trucking, where they made some reforms to the trucking system, where they said that instead of trying to make immigrant truck drivers who are making $10 an hour responsible for buying clean trucks, that they were actually going to make industry pay. And that was a big change. The Port of Los Angeles was the first one to do it, and the numbers don't lie. Right after they enacted their program, they got 3,000 brand new trucks that were privately financed by industry, rolled into service, and they've had an over 20% emissions reduction just from that initiative. I give credit to the Port of Oakland for setting a goal to reduce the health risk from their operations by 85%. That's a good goal. The problem with what the Port of Oakland has done or hasn't done so far, they haven't laid down any specifics on how they're going to reach that goal. And of course, there's no consequences right now if they don't. No consequences to the port, obviously big consequences to the community, especially West Oakland, where 1 in 5 kids already have asthma. It seems like the thing that moved the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, unfortunately, was litigation. From the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Coalition for Clean Air, and others that effectively blocked expansion of those ports unless they cleaned up their act. I don't know, we may need to go here in Oakland. I'm not sure what it takes. We already have a public health crisis. We already have people dying from living next to the port. I don't know what it takes takes to get the port to clean up their operations.
I'm delighted to be here on behalf of Assemblymember Hill. When he became a member of the legislature, he introduced, shortly after taking office, AB 1431, which was in keeping with the movement this direction, an effort to bring Oakland up to the standards that are being followed in Long Beach and Los Angeles. What the Assemblymember is looking towards is this coming May 27th, there will be a hearing in Sacramento, at which time the port will be asked to define those plans and that program.
They have redefined their missions. That's really, and so the paradigm shifted. All of a sudden, the mission of the port is to become the greenest port. That is the mission, and every activity has to be measured by that. That is the mission. Everything else, they want to keep the business, they want to grow, but they're going to be the greenest ports. And what they're doing is just the prelude to what every port in the world will be doing soon, and they're all going to. And that's why it's so important, because Oakland's the next of the pieces to fall. Because if Oakland adopts that mission also and moves there, then the world will begin to see that California is really committed to moving in this direction, and the rest of the world. Because the problems that we have here are not just here. They're everywhere where goods are moved on this planet, through urban areas, through 19th century technology, all polluting. And it is time to get rid of that model and to change to zero emission systems and to do it. And we can do it in the right way. And to rethink how we do it. You know, the bill that I had, I thought was so good because it took the port's plans and it put real consequences to them. I thought that was even more important than the fee, although the fee was in. And it said, you have these plans, half of the money is going, down in Southern California, half the money was going to go towards grade separations and fixing it, and half the money we were going to put on the fee was going to go to air quality improvements. Much of the money will be spent far from the port, because it's not just the ports that are the issues. We're talking about rail systems and distribution centers, and we're ultimately, everything is part of this system. And it has to be done in a way that understands that if we can, as the ports move to new technologies, this will be wonderful growth centers for jobs, and we will set a model. If we electrify, if we move in this direction, if we really clean it up and have renewable sources of energy to provide the energy for this system, these systems, that we will both provide for the future and have a livable place for our kids and our grandchildren. So that's really what it's all about. This is not necessarily about us. It's about that this system, no matter what they say, the pollution keeps getting worse, even in the and so we're on a point where we can really turn that around. Oakland's very, very important. That's why I came, because it may not be exactly the same as LA, Long Beach has done, but what you do, the next port will follow and look also. Because everybody in the world is watching California right now. And there are economic problems, don't get me wrong, and we have to figure out what money we're collecting, but once it becomes part of the mission, then you figure out where the money is, and then they find if you're going to put fees, it's their mission to put fees, because that's really where it is. That's why LA and Long Beach were able to do that, to put it in, because they were proud to do that, because it moved them closer to how they define themselves. And they're competitive. You know, they don't want to give up business either. So this is kind of the model that Washington is looking at. So what you're doing is really not only historic here, it's historic because the nation is going to be looking at us to see whether, in fact, we can move us from the 19th century to the 21st century and protect our residents and have an economy that can move us in new green jobs and move people from these regions into these new clean jobs. And it all comes together, and this is a critical part of it. And so I don't have any answer. I'm just here to support you, to say I've gone through this. You're doing great stuff. It's so important what you're doing. Thank you.